Jake had always been a curious person, especially when it came to technology. As a mechanic living in a small town on a desert planet, he spent his days working on old ships and machines, trying to make something new out of the broken parts he found. He wasn't used to excitement or adventure, but that was all about to change. It was late in the evening when he first noticed the strange glow in the sky. At first, he thought it was just another meteor shower, something common on his desert world. But this light was different. It was too bright, too large, and it seemed to be falling fast, directly toward him. Jake squinted into the sky, his heart starting to race. "What the hell is that?" he muttered to himself. Without thinking, Jake grabbed his old hoverbike and rushed toward the spot where the light had fallen. As he sped across the sandy landscape, his mind raced with questions. Was it a meteor, a ship, maybe a signal from another world? He didn't know, but he had to find out. When he arrived at the crash site, he almost couldn't believe what he saw. There, embedded in the sand, was the wreck of a ship. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. The ship was sleek and shiny, with strange markings on its surface, glowing faintly in the fading light. The air around the ship was thick with the smell of burning metal and something else, something he couldn't quite place. His heart pounded as he dismounted his bike and slowly approached the wreckage. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice trembling slightly. He didn't know why he was talking to a broken ship, but something told him there was more to this than just an ordinary crash. He peered into the ship's cockpit and saw a figure slumped over the controls. It was a person, or at least it looked like a person. Jake's pulse quickened as he realized this wasn't just any ordinary crash. The figure inside was alien. He had heard stories about alien species in the galaxy, but he never expected to see one in his lifetime. The alien was dressed in a form-fitting suit, with glowing markings on its arms and chest. The skin was pale and almost metallic, shimmering faintly in the light. Its long, silver hair flowed behind it, and its face, though strange, had an air of elegance to it. He didn't know what to do. He'd never been in a situation like this before. The alien was unconscious, possibly injured, but alive. Jake took a deep breath and pushed open the cockpit door. He wasn't sure if it was a good idea to get involved, but his instinct told him that leaving this alien to die wasn't the right thing to do. Carefully, he unstrapped the alien's seatbelt and checked for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. Jake's heart pounded as he realized that he might be the only one who could save this strange visitor from another world. Without wasting any more time, he lifted the alien out of the cockpit and gently laid it on the sand beside the wreckage. He could hear the faint hum of the ship's emergency systems still working, but it wouldn't be long before they failed completely. Jake quickly went to work, using his tools to try to stabilize the ship. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough about machines to figure out the basics. He rigged a temporary life support system with the ship's remaining power, connecting it to the alien suit. He hoped it would be enough. After a few tense minutes, the alien's eyes fluttered open. It stared at Jake with confusion and fear, but also a kind of recognition, as if it understood something important. It tried to speak, but its words were strange and incomprehensible. Jake stepped back, unsure of what to do next. Then, something unexpected happened. A soft voice, almost musical, echoed in Jake's mind. "Thank you," the voice said, clear and calm. Jake blinked, stunned. He had heard it in his head, not his ears. The alien's eyes widened as it spoke again, this time out loud. I am Princess Lyra of the Arlenthian Empire. Please, I need your help." Jake's mind raced. The princess of the Arlenthian Empire. He had no idea what that meant, but the alien's voice and the way she spoke seemed desperate. "Help," Jake repeated, his voice shaky. "What happened? Why did you crash?" Lyra's expression darkened, and she closed her eyes as if trying to remember. "I was attacked," she said, her voice growing weaker. My ship was sabotage. I don't know who did it, but I was forced to flee. I'm being hunted." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Hunted?" he asked, barely believing what he was hearing. "Yes," Lyra replied. "My family is in danger, and I am the last hope for my people. I need to get to safety, but I can't do it alone." Jake was caught in a whirlwind of thoughts. This was no ordinary situation. He was just a mechanic. He had no business helping a princess from another world. But something about her calm, her desperation, stirred something in him. He couldn't leave her to die in the desert, not when she was the only one who could explain what was happening. He made a quick decision. "I'll help you," Jake said, his voice firm. "But we need to get out of here. There's no time to waste." Lyra gave him a weak smile, grateful for his willingness to help. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes closing as she finally allowed herself to rest. Jake knew their adventure was only just beginning, and he had no idea what dangers lay ahead. But one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. Jake had no idea what he had gotten himself into. The moment he agreed to help the mysterious alien princess, everything changed. What started as a simple rescue mission turned into something far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. As Jake worked to get the ship's systems back online, he noticed something strange. The sky had begun to darken much quicker than usual. It wasn't the sun setting early, but something else. The air felt heavy, tense, like a storm was brewing, though there wasn't a cloud in sight. His fingers moved quickly over the ship's controls, but his mind couldn't stop racing. Lyra, the alien princess, lay unconscious on the sand beside the wreckage, still hooked up to the makeshift life support system Jake had built. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of responsibility for her, but he knew he couldn't afford to waste any time. They needed to leave. They needed to get out of this desert, fast. Suddenly, a sound of heavy engines echoed from the sky, cutting through the stillness of the desert. Jake froze, his heart racing. He knew that sound. It was the sound of ships, large, military ships, and they were coming fast. A shadow passed overhead, and Jake looked up to see dark shapes descending rapidly toward the ground. His stomach dropped as he realized who was coming. The hunters. Before he could think, the first of the ships landed with a heavy thud, sending sand flying in all directions. Jake quickly ducked behind the wrecked ship, trying to keep out of sight. His heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't know how to fight. He was just a mechanic. But he wasn't going to let anyone take Lyra. The door of the ship opened with a hiss, and several soldiers clad in black armor stepped out. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, their posture rigid and disciplined. Jake had no doubt they were searching for Lyra, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone in their way. The soldiers were relentless, and Jake could see that they weren't just looking for a lost princess. They were hunting down a threat to their empire. Jake took a deep breath and quickly scanned his surroundings. There was no way he could fight them head-on, but maybe he could outsmart them. He needed to buy himself and Lyra some time. He glanced back at the wrecked ship. It was a mess, but there was still some hope. If he could get to the ship's weapon systems, maybe he could use them to make a distraction. But there was a problem. He didn't know how to operate the weapons. He wasn't a soldier, after all. He had no military training. Still, he couldn't just sit there and wait to be captured. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice, cold and sharp, coming from one of the soldiers. "Spread out," the soldier ordered. "Find the princess." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had no time. He had to move, and fast. He quickly grabbed a few tools from his bag and began to make his way toward the ship's entrance, hoping to avoid being seen. He moved carefully, his steps light and quiet. He could hear the soldiers talking as they searched the area. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stay focused. One wrong move, and it was over. Just as he reached the ship, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. He froze, barely breathing. His heart hammered in his chest. He could see the soldier's shadow getting closer, and he knew that if he was spotted, it would be the end for both him and Lyra. Suddenly, a soft beep came from the ship's communication system. Jake cursed under his breath. It was a signal from Lyra. She was awake. Jake. Lyra's voice echoed in his mind again, that soft, calming voice. "They're here. They're looking for me." Jake bit his lip, trying to think of a plan. There was no way he could take on all of them alone. He needed help. The soldier's footsteps grew louder, and Jake quickly ducked into the shadows just as the soldier passed by. His heart raced, but he held his breath, waiting for the right moment. He couldn't afford to make a sound. Finally, the soldier moved on, and Jake saw his chance. He slipped inside the ship, moving quickly but quietly. The inside was cold and dimly lit, with wires and machinery scattered everywhere. He had no time to figure out how it all worked. He needed to act fast. Jake found the control panel and began pressing buttons randomly. He had no idea what he was doing, but he had to try. Suddenly, alarms blared and red lights flashed, filling the ship with an urgent warning. Jake cursed. He hadn't meant to trigger the alarms, but now he had no choice but to use them to his advantage. The soldiers outside must have heard the alarms because their voices grew louder, shouting orders to each other. "Move! They're inside," one of them yelled. Jake's heart raced. He had to buy more time. Without thinking, he quickly located the ship's main weapon systems and activated them. The massive cannons on the ship's exterior powered up, and Jake aimed them at the approaching soldiers. He didn't know how to fire them, but he could at least create a diversion. He slammed his hand down on the fire button. A burst of energy shot out from the cannons, sending a shockwave through the ground. The soldiers outside were thrown back by the force of the blast, their armor rattling as they struggled to regain their footing. Jake ran back to Lyra, who was still lying unconscious, and quickly hooked her up to the life support system again. She needed to wake up. They needed to leave, and fast. Outside, the soldiers regrouped. They weren't giving up. Jake knew it would only be a matter of time before they figured out how to get inside. But he wasn't going to let them capture Lyra, not without a fight. He looked at her one last time, his resolve hardening. They had to escape, or they were both as good as dead. Jake's heart raced as the ship's engines roared to life. Outside, the soldiers were still recovering from the blast, but they wouldn't be distracted for long. He had no idea how much time they had before they would figure out a way to board the ship. He had no choice but to act fast. He rushed to the control panel, his mind racing. He wasn't a pilot. He wasn't even sure how to fly this alien ship, but he had to try. The ship's glowing screens flickered to life as he pressed a few random buttons. The ship shook as it slowly began to rise off the ground, the sand beneath it swirling in a storm of dust. Jake gripped the control panel, trying to steady himself as the ship climbed higher into the sky. Through the windows, he could see the soldiers below, scrambling to get to their own ships. They wouldn't let them escape easily. Jake's grip tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to get them both out of here. "Lyra," he said, turning to the princess. She was still unconscious, but the life support system was keeping her alive. Her pale skin had a faint glow to it, but her breathing was shallow. He could only hope she would wake up soon. Without her, he had no idea what he was doing. The ship finally broke through the atmosphere, and Jake looked out at the stars stretching out before him. He had never seen anything like it. The vastness of space was overwhelming, and for a moment, he forgot about everything else. It was beautiful, but then the reality hit him. He was flying an alien ship with an alien princess and a bunch of soldiers on his tail. It was a long way from home. Suddenly, a soft voice echoed in Jake's mind, pulling him back to the present. "Jake," Lyra's voice was weak but clear. I'm awake." Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Lyra, are you all right?" "I'm better, but we're not out of danger yet," she replied, her voice steadying. "You're flying my ship, but you don't know how to control it, do you?" Jake winced. "No, but I'm trying." Lyra chuckled softly. "I can see that, but you'll need more than just willpower to get us out of here. The soldiers are already alert, and they will track us down." Jake cursed under his breath. He had no idea what to do. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice strained. "You'll need to find a safe place to land," Lyra said. "Somewhere they can't follow us easily. I'll guide you." Jake nodded, relieved that she was awake and could help him. "All right, let's get out of here." Lyra's instructions were calm and precise as she guided Jake through the ship's controls. Her voice, though weak, was full of authority. Jake did his best to follow her directions, trying not to think about how many soldiers were closing in on them. Every minute felt like an eternity. After what felt like hours, they finally found a secluded moon in a nearby system. Lyra told Jake to land the ship there, away from any sensors or military outposts. It was their best chance to hide. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and Jake exhaled, feeling a brief sense of relief. They were safe, for now. Jake stepped away from the control panel, rubbing his eyes. He hadn't realized how tense he had been until now. He needed to rest, but there was no time for that. They were on the run, and Lyra's life was still in danger. Lyra slowly got to her feet, her movements shaky. She looked at Jake with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "You've done more than I could have hoped." Jake shook his head. "I didn't do much. I'm just a mechanic. I don't know how to fight or lead a rebellion." Lyra smiled, though it was a sad smile. "You've done more than that. You've shown me that not all hope is lost. Not all humans are like the ones who betrayed me." Jake frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Lyra's expression grew more serious. "The people who are after me aren't just soldiers. They're part of a larger empire, an empire built on fear and control. My uncle, the Emperor, wants to rule the galaxy, and he doesn't care who he has to crush to do it." Jake's mind raced as he listened to her story. "Your uncle? But why are they after you?" Lyra's gaze darkened. "Because I'm the rightful heir to the throne. My uncle has been hunting me ever since I was a child. He's afraid I will take back what's rightfully mine, that I will end his reign of terror." Jake felt a surge of anger. "That's messed up. No one should have that kind of power." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You don't understand. The galaxy is a vast place, and power is the only thing that matters. My uncle has allied with other species to build his empire, and anyone who opposes him is wiped out. He's taken control of my people, my home planet, and now he wants me dead. If I die, his empire will remain intact." Jake clenched his fists, feeling the weight of her words. He had no idea how big this conflict really was. But one thing was clear. Lyra wasn't just a princess. She was the last hope for a galaxy filled with suffering. "So what do we do now?" Jake asked. Lyra met his gaze with determination. "We fight, together." Jake wasn't sure what he was getting himself into, but the fire in Lyra's eyes made him believe she was ready to take on the universe. And somehow, he knew he couldn't walk away from this. "Not now." "I'm in," Jake said, his voice steady. "I'll help you." Lyra smiled, a spark of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Jake. You're not just a mechanic anymore. You're part of something much bigger." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They had a long road ahead, but he had made a choice, and he wasn't going to back out now. The moon they had landed on was quiet and empty. The cold wind blew across the rocky surface, carrying the faint scent of minerals and dust. Jake stood by the ship, watching the stars twinkle in the sky above. It was peaceful here, but he knew it wouldn't last long. They couldn't stay on this moon forever. The soldiers would find them eventually. They needed to move, and fast. Lyra sat inside the ship, resting, though her eyes never seemed to stop searching. She was alert, always aware of the dangers around her. She wasn't used to being a fugitive, but she was handling it better than Jake expected. Her calmness gave him strength, even though he felt out of his element. He was just a mechanic. She was a princess. They were from two different worlds, yet they were now tied together by a shared enemy. Jake couldn't help but think about how quickly his life had changed. A few days ago, he was working on engines and fixing broken-down ships. Now he was hiding from a galactic empire, trying to protect an alien princess. It didn't make sense, but there was no turning back now. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jake, we need to talk." He turned and walked back inside the ship, where she was sitting by the control panel, her face serious. "What's on your mind?" "We can't keep running forever," Lyra said, her voice firm. "We need to strike back. We need to show my uncle that he can't just take everything from me." Jake hesitated. "I don't know what we can do. I'm not exactly a fighter." "You don't need to be," Lyra replied. "But you have something that my uncle doesn't. You have the element of surprise. My uncle's forces will never expect an attack from someone like you. He's too focused on finding me." Jake frowned. "I'm just a mechanic. What kind of surprise could I give him?" Lyra's eyes sparkled with determination. "You know ships. You know how they work. You could help me destroy one of his supply stations. It would hurt his ability to control the galaxy. It would be a blow to his empire." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know the first thing about destroying a supply station. And even if he did, how could he do it without getting caught? But Lyra's confidence was contagious. She believed in him. That belief made him want to believe in himself too. "What do you have in mind?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but steady. Lyra took a deep breath. "I have information on one of his supply stations. It's located in a nearby sector. It's guarded, but not heavily. If we can infiltrate it, we can sabotage their supply lines, destroy their weapons, and cripple their operations. If we do this right, my uncle will lose a valuable resource." Jake thought about it. It wasn't a perfect plan. It wasn't even a good plan. But it was the only chance they had. If they didn't do something soon, they would be hunted down like animals. And even if they succeeded, it wouldn't guarantee their safety. The empire was huge. But Jake couldn't just sit back and wait for them to be captured. He had to try. "All right," Jake said, his voice resolute. "Let's do it. But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more likely they'll find us." Lyra nodded. "Agreed. I'll make sure we have everything we need. You focus on preparing the ship." Jake turned to the ship's control panel, starting to work on it. He was no expert in alien technology, but he knew enough to make things run smoothly. He checked the weapons systems, making sure they were ready for whatever they might face. He also began working on the ship's stealth systems, hoping to keep their presence hidden from any passing ships. As he worked, Lyra joined him. She wasn't just a princess. She was a skilled strategist. She began analyzing the data she had gathered, pinpointing weaknesses in the enemy's defenses. Together, they began to form a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was all they had. "We'll have to sneak in," Lyra explained, pointing to the map on the screen. "The supply station is surrounded by a ring of smaller patrol ships. We'll have to avoid them. If we can get inside without being detected, we can plant explosives at key locations." Jake nodded, trying to keep up with her strategy. "How do we get past the patrol ships?" "We wait for the right moment," Lyra said. "We'll use the ship's cloaking device to avoid detection. If we time it right, we can slip through undetected." Jake looked at her, still unsure. "And if we don't time it right?" Lyra's face grew serious. "Then we'll have to fight our way out." Jake didn't like the sound of that. He wasn't a fighter, and the thought of going up against trained soldiers made him nervous. But he didn't have a choice. He had to do this. For Lyra. For the galaxy. After several hours of preparation, the ship was ready. The engines hummed to life, and Jake set the course for the supply station. His hands were steady, but his mind was a mess of doubt and fear. They were about to embark on a dangerous mission, and the odds were stacked against them. But he couldn't back down now. As the ship left the moon's surface and entered the vastness of space, Jake stole a glance at Lyra. She was sitting calmly at the control panel, her focus unwavering. There was no fear in her eyes. She knew what was at stake. "We can do this," she said, almost as if reading his thoughts. Jake swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah, we can." With the course set, they traveled through space, their ship blending into the darkness of the stars. The supply station was coming closer, and the risks were growing with every passing second. But Jake knew that there was no turning back. The time for running was over. Now was the time to fight. The ship glided through the emptiness of space, silent and steady. Jake's hands gripped the controls with a firm, but nervous hold. Every minute felt like an hour. The mission they were about to carry out could change everything, or it could be the end of them. The supply station they were heading to was heavily guarded, but Lyra's plan had a chance of working. If they succeeded, they would deal a serious blow to the Empire. But if they failed, Jake didn't want to think about it. Lyra sat beside him, her eyes scanning the stars, her expression calm but determined. She was the only one who truly knew the stakes. The future of her people rested on this mission. Jake didn't feel the weight of that burden as much as she did, but he felt it all the same. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this, but he couldn't turn back now. He had made a promise to help her, and he wasn't going to break it. "We're almost there," Lyra said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the tension behind it. The supply station should be just ahead. Jake nodded, focusing on the controls. The cloaking device was active, and the ship was practically invisible to anyone who might be watching. But that wouldn't last long. The closer they got to the station, the more danger they would be in. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. "We'll wait until the patrol ships pass," Lyra continued. "Then we'll make our move." Jake nodded again, though his stomach was in knots. He didn't like waiting. It made him feel like they were sitting ducks, ready to be taken out with one wrong move. But he trusted Lyra's plan. She knew what she was doing, or at least that's what he hoped. For what felt like an eternity, they stayed hidden in the darkness of space, waiting for the patrol ships to move out of range. Jake kept his eyes on the ship's sensors, watching for any sign of movement. The tension in the cockpit was thick, and the quiet only made it worse. He could feel the weight of Lyra's gaze, though she didn't say anything. She was focused. He had to be too. Finally, Lyra spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now, let's go." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He hit the throttle, and the ship shot forward, moving at a speed that almost made him feel weightless. They were on their way to the heart of the Empire, and there was no turning back now. The station grew larger in the view screen as they approached. It was a massive structure, floating in space like a dark, looming fortress. Armed turrets lined its surface, and several smaller patrol ships circled it like vultures, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. Jake's heart raced as they neared the station. One wrong move, and they would be spotted immediately. Lyra was calm as ever. She guided Jake through the station's outer defenses, her eyes sharp and focused. "Stay close to the shadows," she instructed. "We need to stay out of their sensors' range." Jake did his best to follow her instructions. He maneuvered the ship as carefully as he could, avoiding the scanning beams and patrol ships. The cloaking device kept them hidden, but the slightest mistake could make them visible. Sweat beaded on Jake's forehead, and his hands trembled on the controls. "We're almost there," Lyra said, her voice a little more tense now. "Once we're inside, we need to find the central hub. That's where their most valuable supplies are stored. The explosives will be enough to destroy the entire station if we place them in the right spots." Jake nodded, though his mind was spinning with worry. He didn't know how to plant explosives or sabotage a station. He was just a mechanic, but Lyra believed in him, and that gave him the strength to push forward. They slipped past the outer defenses and into the station's docking bay. The ship's engines hummed quietly as they coasted into the bay, landing softly on the cold metal floor. Jake breathed a sigh of relief. They had made it. But now, the real challenge began. "Stay close," Lyra warned, her voice low and serious. "We'll have to move quickly. If we're caught, we won't make it out alive." Jake nodded and followed her as she led the way out of the ship. They moved through the docking bay, sticking to the shadows. The station was eerily quiet, and the few personnel they saw were busy with their tasks, unaware of the two intruders slipping past them. Lyra guided him through a maze of hallways, her mind sharp and calculating. She knew the station's layout from her previous intelligence work. Jake's job was simple: stay out of sight and help her with the explosives. They reached the central hub, a massive room filled with computers, crates of supplies, and various equipment. This was the heart of the operation. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "We plant the explosives here, and it'll take down the entire station." Jake's heart pounded as he watched her work. Lyra moved quickly, her hand steady as she placed the bombs in strategic locations. Jake did his best to help, setting the detonators and making sure everything was in place. He was nervous, his mind racing with thoughts of being caught. But they couldn't afford to make a mistake. "Just one more," Lyra said, looking at Jake with a reassuring smile. "Then we can get out of here." Before Jake could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lyra's face went pale. "They found us." Jake's heart skipped a beat. They didn't have time. They had to leave, and fast. Lyra grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit. "We can't stay here. They'll be on us in seconds." Jake felt the adrenaline surge through his body as they sprinted through the halls. His mind raced, but there was no time to think. Only one thought mattered now: get out before the station exploded. As they neared the docking bay, the sound of alarms blared, filling the station with a deafening noise. Jake's pulse raced as they reached the ship, but before they could board, several guards appeared in the doorway. Lyra's voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with determination. "We're not leaving without a fight." Jake didn't hesitate. He jumped into the ship's cockpit, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship's engines roared to life, and he took off, pushing the ship into full speed. Behind them, the supply station exploded in a massive flash of light, sending shockwaves through space. Jake looked back, his heart pounding as the station crumbled into nothingness. It was a victory, but it was only the beginning. The blast from the destroyed supply station had sent ripples through space, a burst of light that could be seen from miles away. Jake's hands were still trembling from the explosion as the ship raced through the darkness of space. The ship's hull vibrated slightly as it sped away from the scene, leaving the remnants of the station behind. Lyra sat beside him, her face pale but resolute. The mission had been a success. The Empire would feel the blow, but Jake knew it wasn't over. This was only the beginning. "Did you feel that?" Lyra asked, her voice tight with tension. Jake glanced at the view screen. The stars looked peaceful, but he knew better. "Yeah, I felt it. But we're still alive. That's what matters." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she studied the scanner. "We're not out of danger yet. We need to move quickly before they send reinforcements." Jake nodded, his fingers moving instinctively over the controls. He checked their course. They were headed toward a nearby asteroid field, hoping it would give them cover. But the more they flew, the more Jake felt a growing sense of unease. The Empire wouldn't just let them get away. He knew that. They had to be ready for what was coming. "We're entering the asteroid field," Jake said, trying to stay calm. "It'll give us some cover, but we'll have to navigate carefully." Lyra's eyes never left the scanner. "Stay sharp. The Empire will be sending their best after us. They'll stop at nothing to capture me." Jake clenched his jaw. He didn't like the idea of being hunted, but he couldn't back down now. He had made a promise to Lyra, and he wasn't going to let her down. The ship darted through the asteroid field, avoiding the massive rocks that floated in the void of space. Jake's heart raced as he carefully steered the ship, his mind focused on the task at hand. Every twist and turn felt like a life-or-death decision. The slightest mistake could lead to disaster. Lyra spoke again, her voice steady but urgent. "There's a ship on our tail." Jake's eyes flicked to the scanner. A small, fast ship was closing in on them. He could see its outline against the dark sky. "We're not outrunning it," he muttered. "We need to think of something fast." Lyra's eyes flashed with determination. "We can't let them catch us. If they do, it's over. You need to shake them off." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He pushed the ship into a sharp turn, using the asteroid field for cover. The enemy ship followed, its engines roaring as it chased after them. Jake's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. He had never been in a space dogfight before, but he had learned a lot about flying since he'd met Lyra. He wasn't an expert, but he was learning fast. The ship dipped and weaved between the asteroids, using the rocky landscape to block their pursuers' shots. The enemy ship fired several times, but Jake was able to avoid the blasts by threading through narrow gaps between the asteroids. The tension in his chest grew with every near miss. They couldn't keep this up forever. "We need to lose them," Lyra said, her voice tight with anxiety. "They'll keep coming until they catch us." Jake's mind raced as he thought of a plan. There had to be a way to outsmart them. Then it hit him. "I have an idea," he said, his voice suddenly filled with confidence. Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide with hope. "What is it?" "We're going to make them think we're going into a dead zone," Jake explained quickly. "There's a black hole not far from here. If we can make it look like we're heading straight for it, they'll think we're going to crash. They'll pull off." Lyra's eyes widened in realization. "It's risky, but it just might work. If we're lucky, they'll fall for it." Jake didn't wait for any more instructions. He pushed the throttle to full speed and headed straight for the black hole. The ship accelerated toward the dark, swirling mass, the powerful gravitational pull of the black hole pulling at their ship like a giant hand. The enemy ship followed, its engines screeching as it pushed forward. "We're almost there," Jake muttered under his breath. Come on, come on." Lyra watched the scanner closely, her eyes scanning for any sign that the enemy ship was breaking off. "They're still on us. We need to give them one more push." Jake gritted his teeth. He had no choice now. He turned the ship sharply at the last moment, pulling out of the black hole's gravitational pull. The ship banked hard to the side, using the momentum to swing around and head in the opposite direction. The enemy ship, too close to the black hole to react in time, didn't follow. It veered off course and shot toward the event horizon, disappearing into the darkness of space. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He looked over at Lyra, who was smiling despite the fear still in her eyes. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We lost them." "For now," Lyra said, her smile fading. "But it won't be long before they send more ships. We need to get to the nearest safe planet." Jake nodded. He wasn't ready to relax just yet. They had gotten lucky this time, that the Empire wouldn't give up. They were out there, waiting. And now that they knew Lyra was alive, they would stop at nothing to find her. "Where's the nearest planet?" Jake asked. Lyra quickly scanned the map. "There's a small, uncharted planet nearby. It's not much, but it's a good place to lay low for a while." Jake adjusted their course. "All right, let's get there. We need some time to regroup." The ship set a course for the planet, the stars streaking by as they sped through space. For now, they were safe. But Jake knew the battle was far from over. The Empire would keep coming, and the stakes were higher than ever. Lyra glanced at Jake, her eyes serious. "You did well today, Jake. You've proven you can handle more than just fixing ships." Jake managed a small smile. "Guess I've learned a lot from you." Lyra returned the smile. though it was filled with both gratitude and worry. "We have a long way to go, Jake, but together we might just stand a chance." As they sped toward the distant planet, Jake knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of the fight, but with Lyra by his side, he believed they could face whatever came next. The small planet they had landed on was quiet, hidden away from the rest of the galaxy. It was a far cry from the vast cities and space stations Lyra was used to, but it offered them the shelter they needed. The ship, now safely tucked away in a hidden cave on the planet's surface, hummed softly as the last of its systems powered down. Jake stood at the entrance of the cave, looking out at the alien landscape. The planet was barren, rocky, with a strange orange sky. There were no signs of life, just empty desert stretching out as far as the eye could see. Lyra approached, her footsteps light against the ground. "We're safe for now," she said, her voice a little weary. "But we can't stay here forever." Jake nodded, his thoughts racing. The Empire wouldn't give up. They had already sent more ships after them, and it was only a matter of time before they found this planet too. He had done what he could to fix the ship and hide it, but the longer they stayed here, the more likely they were to be discovered. "We need to keep moving," Jake said, his voice low. "We can't let them catch us." Lyra gave him a long look. "I know, but we're running out of options." Jake turned to her. "Then it's time to take the fight to them." Lyra looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You mean attack them?" "We can't keep running forever," Jake said, his voice steady. "We're on the edge. If we don't do something now, we'll be trapped. But if we strike back, if we hit them where it hurts, we might stand a chance." Lyra considered this, her brow furrowing. "You're right. But it won't be easy. The Empire has more power than we can imagine. They'll come at us with everything they have." Jake clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll have to be smarter than they are. We know their weaknesses. We know how they think. We can do this." Lyra didn't hesitate. "All right. What do we need?" Jake looked out at the vast desert, his mind already working. "We need information. We need to know where their main fleet is. We need to hit their command center, cripple their control over the galaxy. If we can destroy their flagship, we'll break their hold." Lyra nodded. "And how do we get that information?" Jake turned to her with a determined look. "We'll infiltrate one of their communications outposts. They won't expect us to strike there." Lyra smiled slightly. "It sounds risky, but it just might work." Jake returned her smile. "It's the only chance we have." The two of them spent the next several hours preparing for the mission. They gathered supplies, checked the ship, and reviewed the data on the Empire's communication networks. Jake felt a growing sense of anticipation as the plan started to take shape. They were about to do something bold, something dangerous. But it felt right. They couldn't wait any longer. Once everything was ready, they climbed into the ship, and Jake set the course for the enemy's communications outpost. The planet was quiet and desolate, the perfect place for them to make a plan without distractions. But as they entered space, the quiet seemed to stretch on endlessly, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Do you think they found us?" Jake asked as he glanced at the scanner. Lyra's eyes flicked to the screen. "Not yet, but we'll have to move quickly. They'll be sending ships out soon." Jake nodded, gripping the controls tighter. "We'll be in and out before they know we're there." The journey to the communications outpost was tense. They flew through empty space, each moment dragging on as the anticipation built. Jake focused on keeping the ship on course, every sense alert for any signs of danger. Lyra sat beside him, scanning the space around them, her eyes sharp and calculating. As they approached the outpost, the station came into view, a large structure floating in the cold blackness of space. It was heavily guarded, with several patrol ships circling around it. The odds of getting in unnoticed seemed slim, but Jake didn't have time to second-guess the plan. "Ready?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite the nerves running through him. Lyra's voice was calm and firm. "Ready. Let's do this." Jake activated the cloaking device and piloted the ship closer to the station. The shields were up, and the ship's sensors were at maximum sensitivity. They had to slip in unnoticed, avoid the patrol ships, and find a way to access the station's communication network. "We need to dock in the maintenance bay," Lyra said, pointing to a small entry point on the station's side. "It's the least watched." Jake guided the ship toward the bay, his heart pounding as they got closer. The patrol ships were just a few hundred meters away, and they were moving closer. Jake held his breath as they passed, praying the cloaking device held. They made it. The ship docked silently in the maintenance bay, and the engines powered down. Jake exhaled, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. "Stay close," Lyra whispered, already heading for the exit. "We can't afford to get caught." They made their way through the station, using the shadows to hide and moving quickly. The maintenance corridors were dark, empty except for the occasional technician or guard who didn't notice them. Jake's mind raced as he tried to stay focused. They had to reach the control room, and they had to do it fast. When they reached the control room, Lyra quickly hacked into the station's systems, bypassing the security protocols. It didn't take long for her to gain access to the communication network. She started pulling up information, her eyes scanning the data. "There it is," she said, her voice sharp with excitement. "The location of the fleet's flagship. We have everything we need." Jake felt a surge of relief. They had what they came for. Now they just needed to get out. But before they could leave, alarms blared through the station. The sound was deafening, and the red lights flashing made everything feel urgent and chaotic. "They found us," Lyra said, her voice tense. Jake grabbed her arm. "We need to move now." They ran back through the maintenance corridors, heading for the ship. But as they neared the bay, they saw soldiers blocking their path. Jake's mind raced. There was no time for a fight. He pulled Lyra toward a side corridor, hoping they could make it to another exit. The soldiers were close behind. Jake felt his heart hammering in his chest. They couldn't afford to be caught now. He glanced at Lyra. She was focused, her face set in determination. They reached the exit, and Jake shoved open the door, pushing Lyra through. He turned to face the soldiers who were gaining on them. "Go," he shouted. Lyra didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the ship. Jake followed closely behind, firing a few shots at the soldiers to buy them more time. They reached the ship, and Jake slammed the door shut, locking it. The engines roared to life, and they shot into space, leaving the station behind. "We have the location," Jake said, his voice filled with relief. "Now we just need to hit them before they can react." Lyra nodded. This is it, the final stand. As they headed toward the enemy fleet, both of them knew this was their last chance. The Empire had thrown everything at them, but they were still standing. And now, they had one shot to end it all.